Barron Trump surprises high school janitor with SUV. What happened next will leave you in tears. The night was electric with energy, the kind of buzz that only comes from a room filled with powerful figures, glittering chandeliers, and a crowd eager to see and be seen. It was one of the year's most exclusive galas, where politics, wealth, and influence collided in a whirlwind of whispered conversations and polite, measured smiles. Among the notable faces in the room were two names that carried weight far beyond the confines of Washington, D.C. or New York society: Hunter Biden and Barron Trump. Hunter Biden entered the grand ballroom with his usual air of confidence. Dressed in a sleek tuxedo and carrying a drink in his hand, he commanded attention, not just because of his last name, but because of the energy he brought wherever he went. People watched him as he moved through the crowd, exchanging greetings with senators, CEOs, and media power players, his polished charm on full display. On the other side of the room, standing slightly apart from the crowd, was Barron Trump. Much younger and taller than most expected, Barron had an air of quiet composure about him. He wasn't the type to clamor for attention. Instead, he observed the room with a sense of calm curiosity, offering nods of acknowledgement to those who approached him. He wasn't flashy or boastful, just a reserved young man in a world of larger-than-life personalities. The two figures couldn't have been more different. Hunter, known for his bold, sometimes controversial persona, and Barron, carrying himself with the kind of understated confidence that made people wonder what was going on behind those sharp, focused eyes. It was inevitable that their paths would cross that evening. What no one in the room anticipated, however, was how that interaction would unfold and the shockwave it would send through the crowd. The moment came just after the main course was served. A soft hum of conversation filled the air as guests mingled, their laughter blending with the distant notes of a live orchestra. Hunter, now surrounded by a small group of admirers, seemed to relish being the center of attention. With a sly grin, he glanced over at Barron, who stood nearby, quietly sipping his drink. What happened next began as a subtle remark, something that could have been brushed off if it hadn't been Hunter Biden delivering it. His voice, just loud enough to carry, made a comment, something laced with humor, but with an unmistakable edge. The crowd around him chuckled, their laughter rippling out like a stone hitting still water. Barron, hearing the remark, didn't react at first. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, the laughter fading into an awkward silence as all eyes turned to the youngest Trump. Everyone expected him to look away, to let it slide, to avoid confrontation. After all, he was still just a teenager, standing in a room filled with seasoned players who thrived on moments like this. But Barron didn't look away. Instead, he lifted his chin slightly, his expression calm but firm, and turned toward Hunter. The entire room seemed to shift as the young Trump walked slowly across the polished floor, his presence commanding attention in a way no one had ever seen before. What he said next left the entire room stunned, a silence so profound that even the orchestra seemed to falter for a brief moment. Hunter's smirk vanished, replaced by something no one could quite define. Barron's response wasn't just unexpected, it was unforgettable. The air in the room was heavy, the kind of silence that feels louder than a crowd cheering. All eyes were fixed on Barron Trump, who now stood directly across from Hunter Biden, their contrasting personalities on full display. Barron's calm, measured stance was a stark contrast to Hunter's usual swagger. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped, with the entire gala waiting to see what would happen next. Hunter had always been known for his sharp wit and occasional provocations, whether people loved him or criticized him. One thing was certain, he never shied away from stirring the pot. It was part of his charm to some, but to others, it was a reminder of the controversies that followed him like a shadow. He had expected Barron, the youngest of the Trump clan, to falter under the pressure, maybe even retreat. After all, this was unfamiliar territory for someone so young, surrounded by political and social heavyweights. But Barron's steady gaze never wavered. His words, while few, had been deliberate, spoken with a clarity that cut through the tension like a knife. They weren't defensive or overly aggressive, but they carried weight, an unshakable confidence that made everyone in the room reconsider their assumptions about him. As the murmurs began to ripple through the crowd, Barron's composed demeanor started to peel back layers of the story. To those watching, it became clear that this wasn't just a moment between two individuals. It was bigger than that. It symbolized the weight of their respective families' legacies, the ongoing divide between two of America's most scrutinized dynasties. For Barron, this moment wasn't about a personal grudge or a quick retort. It was about something deeper. For years, he had grown up in the public eye, constantly compared to his father and siblings, always scrutinized for every word, every move. People rarely stopped to wonder what it was like for him, a teenager navigating the expectations of being part of one of the most powerful families in the country. His quietness had often been mistaken for timidity, his preference for staying out of the spotlight interpreted as indifference. But now, in this moment, it became evident that Barron had been paying attention all along, quietly observing, understanding the complexities of the world around him. Hunter, on the other hand, wasn't used to being caught off guard. His life had been a whirlwind of highs and lows, always under the glaring spotlight of media scrutiny. He had developed a thick skin, using humor and boldness to deflect criticism. But Barron's reaction, calm, confident, and unshaken, had left him momentarily at a loss. The crowd could see it too. The smirk that had been plastered on his face moments before was now gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. What added to the tension was how divided the room seemed to be. Some were clearly uncomfortable, as if witnessing something they shouldn't. Others leaned in, intrigued by the unexpected turn of events. The older generation, seasoned politicians and society figures, seemed to view it as a symbolic clash between two ideologies, two generations, and perhaps even two different ways of navigating power and influence. What made the situation even more compelling was how both men carried the weight of their family names. For Hunter, it was the Biden legacy, a name tied to decades of political influence but also shadowed by controversy. For Barron, it was the Trump brand, a name that evoked strong emotions on both ends of the spectrum. To many in the room, it felt as though this moment was a microcosm of the larger cultural and political divide gripping the nation. As the orchestra resumed playing softly in the background, trying to smooth over the palpable tension, Barron did something no one expected. He took a small step closer to Hunter, his voice calm yet firm. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it that captured the room's attention. There was no malice in his tone, no attempt to embarrass or humiliate. Instead, his words carried a quiet authority, the kind that comes from someone who doesn't need to shout to be heard. Hunter listened, his expression shifting as Barron spoke. The younger man's words weren't an attack, they were a reflection, a subtle but powerful reminder of the shared humanity that often gets lost in the noise of politics and public perception. By the time Barron finished, the room was silent again, but this time it was different. The tension had shifted into something else entirely, respect, perhaps even admiration. It was clear that this was no ordinary exchange. It wasn't about who won the moment or who walked away with their ego intact. It was about the unexpected grace and wisdom that Barron displayed, something that caught everyone, including Hunter, off guard. As Barron turned and walked away, leaving Hunter to process what had just happened, the crowd remained still, as if unsure how to react. Slowly, conversations began to pick up again, but the mood in the room had undeniably changed. People whispered among themselves, speculating about what this moment meant and how it would be remembered. For Hunter, the encounter was a moment of reflection, one that forced him to confront the assumptions he had made. For Barron, it was a defining moment, one where he stepped out of the shadow of his family's name and showed the world a glimpse of the man he was becoming. But the night wasn't over, and the events that followed would only add to the intrigue of what had just unfolded. As the evening carried on, the mood in the room began to shift. Conversations resumed, but something had fundamentally changed. People spoke in hushed tones, their eyes occasionally flickering toward Hunter Biden, who now stood quietly by the bar, deep in thought. Gone was the confident grin he had worn earlier. Whatever had transpired between him and Barron Trump had clearly left an impression, and for the first time that night, Hunter seemed more introspective than performative. Barron, on the other hand, had quietly rejoined a small group near the edge of the ballroom. He didn't seem to be basking in the aftermath of the moment, nor did he look for any validation from those around him. If anything, he seemed content to let the evening unfold naturally, blending into the background in his usual unassuming way. Yet, no one could look at him the same way anymore. The quiet young man who many had underestimated had revealed a depth of character that people couldn't stop talking about. But just as the room began to settle, a new development added another layer of intrigue. One of the evening's hosts, a well-known philanthropist, stepped up to the microphone on the grand stage to announce an impromptu segment of the program. She spoke about the importance of bridging divides and finding common ground, especially in times of great polarization. Her words seemed oddly fitting for the night, given what had just occurred. Then, to everyone's surprise, she invited both Hunter and Barron to join her on stage. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was a moment no one had expected, and for a brief second, there was uncertainty about whether either man would accept the invitation. All eyes turned to Hunter, who hesitated before setting his drink down and making his way toward the stage. Barron, after a moment's pause, followed suit. When they stood side by side under the spotlight, the contrast between them was even more striking. Hunter's face still carried traces of his earlier bravado, though now tempered by reflection. Barron, tall and composed, maintained his calm demeanor, his expression unreadable but not unfriendly. The host, sensing the gravity of the moment, asked them to share a few words about unity and understanding, a chance to address the room in light of what had happened earlier. Hunter was the first to speak. His voice, though confident, had softened. He acknowledged the complexities of being in the public eye and admitted that it often led to moments of defensiveness and misjudgment. Without going into specifics, he spoke about the weight of expectations and the mistakes that come with being human. It wasn't an apology, but it was close, a rare moment of vulnerability that seemed to catch the audience off guard. When it was Barron's turn, the room fell silent again. His words were deliberate and measured, reflecting a wisdom beyond his years. He spoke about the importance of listening, even when it's difficult, and finding ways to move forward despite differences. He didn't point fingers or dwell on the earlier exchange, instead focusing on the bigger picture, how people could come together even in a room filled with opposing views. His words carried a sincerity that resonated deeply, earning him quiet nods of agreement from even the most skeptical faces in the crowd. The moment felt transformative, not just for the two men on stage, but for everyone in the room. As they stepped down, the tension that had hung over the evening seemed to dissolve, replaced by a sense of hope and renewed perspective. The orchestra picked up a lively tune, and the gala returned to its original purpose, a celebration of charity and connection. By the end of the night, Hunter and Barron's interaction had become the talk of the event. But it wasn't just gossip, it was a conversation about the potential for growth, understanding, and grace, even in the most unexpected moments. People left the gala with more than just memories of a glamorous evening. They left with a story that reminded them of the power of humility, the strength and quiet confidence, and the importance of looking beyond surface differences. As for Hunter and Barron, they went their separate ways, but not before sharing a brief nod of acknowledgement, a subtle yet meaningful gesture that seemed to say everything that words couldn't. It wasn't the start of a friendship or a dramatic reconciliation. It was simply a moment of mutual respect, a reminder that even in a room filled with divides, there's always the possibility of finding common ground. And that, more than anything, was what people would remember.